Howdy, folks. So today I want to talk a little bit about a paper that's been making a few ripples within the science community on Twitter recently. It's a paper published in Nature Communications called The Association Between Early Career Informal Mentorship in Academic Collaborations and Junior Author Performance. And I think it's a very good example of how scientists are able to collect very interesting data sets and analyze those data sets in meaningful ways, but still draw the incorrect conclusions based off the results that they get from those data sets. Part 1: Big Shot versus Hub Experience. So, the main goal of this paper was to analyze how a scientist's future career is impacted by the people they work with early on while they're still developing the tools and skill sets required for them to be successful within academia. The researchers used impact factor as their measurement for success, which looks at the number of citations that a scientist receives over time as a way of judging whether the research that they're producing is of a high quality. The general idea being that successful scientists will produce high quality research that goes on to be cited by plenty of other scientists, while less successful scientists will generally produce research that either doesn't get cited because it's not well written or doesn't get cited because none of the findings that they're producing are particularly interesting or novel. While this isn't always the case, and the focus on impact factor has actually led to a number of issues within academia, such as the publish or perish mentality, impact factor is nevertheless still very widely used as a way of evaluating a scientist's achievements, especially within institutions. The researchers looked at about 3 million mentor-protege pairs across a wide range of disciplines. I'll get into how they got those 3 million pairs a bit later, so stick a pin in that. And specifically, they looked at how the mentors affected the impact factor of the protege later on in their career, looking at the mentor's impact factor prior to working with the protege, which they refer to as big shot experience, as it denotes how much of a big shot the mentor is in the field, as well as the size of the mentor's network of collaborators, which they refer to as hub experience, as it denotes how much of a hub that member is in terms of networking and collaboration potential. They use coarse and exact matching, or CEM, which is a non-parametric method of matching data to control for a bunch of potentially confounding variables so that they could focus specifically on how big shot experience or hub experience relates to the protege's impact factor later in their career. So looking at the results here, essentially what they did was they took their CEM data, arranged it based on either big shot experience or hub experience, and then broke those up into 5 quintiles and compared those quintiles to one another in order to measure the increase in impact factor of the protege later in their career. And what they found essentially is that while higher big shot experience and hub experience both correlated with greater impact factors for the protege, big shot experience seemed to have a much larger effect, meaning that a protege is likely to be far more successful long-term if they worked with someone who was already a big name in their field than if they worked with someone who had a wide network of collaborators. These results could be interpreted in a number of different ways. A big-name scientist might just have a better understanding of what it takes to be successful within academia, and they're able to pass that on to their proteges, who then go on to also be successful within academia. Alternatively, it could be that the protege is able to bring more attention to themselves by virtue of working alongside such a big name within their field. And that extra attention being paid to them results in more job opportunities or more collaboration opportunities or better funding in order for them to write more papers and be more successful. On the other side of things, we could ask what's going on with regards to hub experience. Now, this is a bit of a personal anecdote, but when I was working towards my master's thesis, my advisor had a collaboration network that literally spanned the globe. She was working on projects with scientists from across 4 or 5 different continents. And because of the nature of the work that I was working on, I wasn't really able to tap into that network in any meaningful way because what I was working on really didn't overlap with what those collaboration projects were looking at. So the questions arise: are the proteges taking full advantage of the network of collaborators potentially available to them? How do proteges that are able to tap into that network compare to those that don't? And does tapping into that network reduce that massive disparity that we're seeing between those working with big shots and those working with hub experience mentors? Unfortunately, the researchers never really touch on any of these ideas because they're too busy focusing on Part 2, Diversity Policies. What can I say but yikes? So this is the part of the paper where things get a little questionable. Like with the big shot versus hub comparison, they use CEM to look at how gender of the mentor as well as the protege affects a protege's future outcome. In this case, further breaking it down by the number of mentors that the protege had and the relative number of men and women acting as mentors, which is how they got to this graph. The basic idea here is that they matched groups based on the total number of mentors the protege had, and then compared the outcomes of the proteges that had all male mentors to those who had however many numbers of female mentors, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, with the change in outcome being represented by the color of the cell. The darker the shade of red, the greater the difference in future impact factor of proteges with female mentors versus male mentors. Now, there's a lot to get from these two graphs, which do in fact show a significant decrease in future impact factor for proteges who had female mentors, especially female proteges with female mentors, and there's a lot of potential factors that could be causing the disparity in outcome. The paper briefly mentions that female scientists tend to be on more committees and therefore may have less time available to invest in their proteges, as well as pointing out the Matilda effect, where the research interests of women are typically undervalued, and that proteges that end up following up on that research may end up suffering because of this. Despite these explanations, the paper quickly falls apart as they end up concluding that current diversity policies promoting female-female mentorships, as well intended as they may be, could hinder the careers of women who remain in academia in unexpected ways. Female scientists, in fact, may benefit from opposite gender mentorships in terms of their publication potential and impact throughout their post-mentorship careers. I can't even fathom how you go through all this data, point out all the potential biases that could result in this data, and still in the end just throw your hands up and say, well, the only solution I can think of is that we should have fewer female-female mentorship relationships. It's clearly hurting our future women scientists. There are piles of evidence that female-female mentorships have a hugely positive impact on women going forward in academia. I know this, and I know that you know this, because you literally cite some of them in your own paper. And let's talk about how you just decide to chuck all of that work right out the fucking window. Such studies often compare proteges that have a female mentor to those who do not have a mentor at all, rather than to those who have a male mentor. First off, one of the papers you cited does in fact compare women with a female mentor to those with male mentors. This study, which looked at PhD students and found that students working with advisors of the same gender were more productive during their PhD work, and that female students who worked with female advisors were more likely to become faculty members later on in their careers. Second off, let's just go back to that definition of mentor that you were using that I skipped over a little bit earlier. You define mentor as a senior scientist who co-authored at least one paper and was affiliated with the same lab as the protege. And yes, I know you sent out surveys to see if the co-authors gave advice on the experimental design or writing process, but there's a massive difference between giving advice on how to improve your writing and mentoring someone on how to navigate their way through the world of academia. What's worse is when we go back to your conclusion in the light of this definition of mentorship. You say you want policies that focus not only on retaining women in science, but also on maximizing their long-term scientific impact. But if your best advice is for female scientists to focus on opposite gender mentorships, and your definition of a mentorship is any collaboration at all, you're essentially telling young female scientists to never collaborate with other women on projects. That's not a solution. That's nonsense. Part 3. Conclusion. I think what bugs me the most about this paper is the fact that there's so much the researchers could be saying but aren't. They could have talked about how, despite the positive impacts of female to female mentorships, there are still inherent biases in the system that serve to undermine those benefits. They could have discussed how metrics like impact factor don't give a full picture of someone's academic career or ability. Heck, they could have just scrapped the gender talk entirely and talked about how collaborating with big name scientists early in your career has a bigger impact on your future than working with someone who can direct you towards a massive network of potential collaborators. Instead, they went with one of the worst conclusions you could reach with this data, and sadly, the rest of the paper just gets dragged down because of it.